So, how does a country, a place once praised as a socialist success story, end up in a total humanitarian crisis? It's a huge question, and today we're going to unpack the story of Venezuela's collapse. To really get a grip on what happened, you have to understand the hype that came before it. It wasn't that long ago, back in 2011, that you had prominent figures like U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders pointing to Venezuela as a kind of model, a place where the American dream was supposedly flourishing.
And that wasn't just a one-off comment. When Hugo Chavez died in 2013, you saw headlines praising his economic miracle. So what on earth happened to that miracle? Well, to find out, the two economists behind our source material decided to go to the front lines. It was way too dangerous to go deep inside Venezuela at the time, so in January 2017, they traveled right to the border with Colombia to see the fallout for themselves. And this border, which is really just a couple of bridges over the Táchira River, had become the absolute epicenter of the story. It was like watching two completely different economic worlds unfold, side by side in real time. On the Colombian side, they described a scene of pure chaos, but it was the chaos of a thriving market. It was this lively, bustling hub with dozens of stores and little roadside stands selling literally everything you could need: flour, sugar, cooking oil, toilet paper, even tires, all the basics. And who was buying all this stuff? Thousands of Venezuelans, just pouring across that bridge every single day. And we're not just talking about the very poor. This was the middle class too, hauling empty suitcases and bags, just desperate to buy whatever they could find and carry back home. But the moment you crossed the bridge into Venezuela, wow, the contrast was just jarring. That bustling energy completely vanished. Instead, it was eerily quiet. A big duty-free store stood totally abandoned. And the only other business around was this massive gas station with a full staff of attendants, but there were zero cars, not one, because the bridge was closed to all vehicles. So, what gives? How can two sides of the very same bridge be so radically different? To explain this, we have to pivot from what you can see on the ground to some of the economic theory behind it. And here's the thing, Venezuela wasn't always like this, not even close. If you go back to 1970, it was actually ranked the 10th freest economy in the world, and it was a pretty prosperous place. Fast forward to 2014, and it had plummeted to dead last. The authors of our source point to this classic economic idea. You've probably heard of it, Adam Smith's invisible hand. The basic concept is that free markets work because when everyone is pursuing their own interests, it kind of magically creates a well-functioning economy for everybody. But, and this is the important part, it only works if you have two key things: secure property rights and the freedom for people to buy and sell at prices set by the market, not the government. So, in the author's view, this is what happens when you tie up that invisible hand, when a government starts controlling prices, seizing private property, and just suffocating businesses. The result is what they saw: shortages, economic collapse, and eventually a mass exodus. We're talking about an estimated 4 million people who have been forced to flee their own country. Because this really isn't about some abstract economic theory or numbers on a chart. It has very real and often completely heartbreaking consequences for the people who have to live through it every single day. Back on that bustling Colombian side of the border, amidst all the vendors yelling about the rice and flour they were selling, the authors heard this one particularly chilling cry over and over: compramos pelo. We buy hair. Let's just pause for a second and break down the economics of this. For the person buying, it's just hair, right? Hair for extensions. But for the Venezuelan woman selling it, that $20 she might get could be equal to an entire month's salary at a minimum wage job, plus her government food rations. An entire month's worth of value, all for her hair? The authors met this one middle-class couple, Paulo and Ana Maria, who had driven 780 miles just to get to the border. Can you imagine? The journey took them 3 days because the roads were so infested with bandits. They bought what they could, rice, medicine, car parts, but they told the authors that this was it. This would be their last trip. It had just become too dangerous to even try. This crisis wasn't just an inconvenience. It was about sheer survival. A survey from 2016 found something absolutely shocking. In just 1 year, 3/4 of all adults in Venezuela had lost an average of 19 pounds. Not because they were dieting, but because there wasn't enough food. And the official health stats were just as grim. In 2016, infant mortality jumped by 30%.
Over 11% of kids under 5 were suffering from malnutrition. And get this, when Venezuela's own Minister of Health released these numbers, she was fired almost immediately. And all of this brings us to the author's final and maybe most important argument, the direct line they draw between the loss of economic freedom and the total collapse of political freedom.
Here, they're really leaning on the work of economists like F.A. Hayek and Milton Friedman. Both of them argued that you simply cannot have one without the other, that political freedom can't survive if it doesn't have a foundation of economic freedom to stand on.
So how does that happen? Well, according to the authors, it's a predictable step-by-step process. First, the government takes total control of the economy. That gives it the power to punish anyone who disagrees. For example, by firing state employees who don't vote for the ruling party. From there, it's a short road to banning opposition parties and rigging elections. So the whole story of Venezuela's collapse really leaves us with this one fundamental question. It gets right to the heart of the relationship between a government and its people. When a state has the power to provide you with everything, what happens when it also gains the power to take everything away?